Alrighty, so today I'm going to be doing a two-parter. I'm going to do a full meta review. Going to look at what's shaping up, what new decks are coming out, what's winning. I'll be looking at some deck lists as well. But on top of that, I will be doing a full recap of the PQ I just played at on Saturday in New York City at Hex & Co. This was a very stacked event, lots of good players. 5 members of my testing team from the KTOD testing team were there, and we had a really good time. It was a really fun event, and I'm excited to break it down. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't, and do check out my Patreon if you're looking for some more content from me. All right, so the goals here. Recap my event. I played Kira ECL, by the way. You'll see that deck list a little later. I will review it, review the choices that I made, why I played it. After that, we'll be jumping over to SWU Competitive Hub to take a look at some recent tournament results, look at like the meta percentages, what decks are being played, what decks are winning, probably look at a few deck lists that look interesting and some new stuff that might be becoming popular. All right, let's get into my breakdown for the event. So I took Kira ECL. This was a 7-round PQ Swiss with a top cut to top 8. I finished in 4th place at this event. I played 9 rounds in this tournament, and 5 of those 9 rounds I got paired into a teammate of mine, which is kind of insane. I played all 4 of the teammates that I showed up with, and I played one of them twice. And yeah, let's see how this event went. So round 1, from the start, friendly fire. I played against my teammate Steve with Bossk Green. He hosed me in game 1. It wasn't even close. It's kind of similar game 2 for me in the other direction. Game 3 was actually a real game, but I was able to take this one primarily on the back of a shielded Snoke. I think shields in particular are an issue for red-green decks. All the removal is damage based, so if you're able to stick a big threat with a shield, it can be really problematic. It's been a strategy I've kind of pushed previously with Kira, and specifically with Kira against like other decks that don't play like blue based removal, and it definitely paid off here. In round 2, I played against an off-meta Boba Yellow Brew. Slow hero mid-range decks are good matchups for Kira. This was a 2-0 victory for myself. In round 3, I played another Bossk Green, the person that I knew that plays at a local in New Jersey, and I was able to take it down 2-0, but these were also both pretty grindy games. Actually, the first one especially was a very long. I think we went up to like 12 resources each, but I was able to take this one down. In round 4, another local that I know, this is Pasquale from New York City. I played against Mono Yellow Han here. I did 2-0 this was very difficult, and I'll do a little spiel here in general about Mono Yellow Han for Kira. I do find this matchup decent for Kira. It's by no means like a crushing in either direction, but we do have the tools, especially with ECL, to keep them off from what they primarily want to do into slower control decks, which is DJ, right? We have a 5 deployed leader that really impacts the board. Their early units typically are 3 power units, which further makes that Kira flip powerful. She's able to usually get a free kill off. ECL, of course, is a very important card in this matchup too, just giving you presence on board while removing theirs so that they can't combo you out with a DJ and on the 7 resource turn nearly as much. Of course, this insulates you from getting tech DJ'd, which is not something they really ever try to do against you in against Akira. But yeah, I was able to take this one 2-0, and then I was 4-0 going into round 5, and then bam, another friendly fire. I got matchup into John, who was playing Django Tarkentown, a matchup I certainly did not want to see very frequently. I advocated in my earlier Kira video, and it was actually a Kira and Krennic video guide. I do recommend, if you're interested in Kira, go check it out. It's almost 2 hours long, so I did put a lot of information in there. But at that time, I was talking about how I thought 30 health Kira was probably a better choice, but this was a while ago when Django Tarkentown was probably the most played deck. Since then, Mono Yellow Han has grown tremendously in play rate, as well as things like Quinlan and Anakin. And I felt like ECL was definitely the correct choice into that kind of field. I think it's just a overall, other than the Django Tarkin Town matchup specifically, is better positioned. But I know just how much I have sacrificed in this deck and with the ECL build into this matchup, right? All our big chunky ECLers, other than Devastating Gunship, are complete duds like Lone Pike and Gideon. And even a Devastating Gunship ECL doesn't always do that much when they have Tarkin Town to immediately remove it. So you often need to try to find a way for them to waste that Tarkin Town earlier, which is really difficult. But yes, tough matchup. You can watch this one on stream. It was streamed on McClunky Gaming's Twitch. If you want to watch me lose 0-2 very fast, it is a good place to start. But John absolutely crushed it. He finished Swiss 7-0, and he did make it to the finals of this event. So big shout out there. Round 6, got paired into another teammate of mine, Alex. However, he graciously conceded this match. He has already won a PQ, so he let me have the win. It was very nice of him to do that, and I rewarded that concession by winning my in round 7 against Austin from McClunky Gaming, and he's actually the guy that took me out in the top 4 at the last PQ I went to in set 2, so the last one I played in the previous cycle, and I was able to get my redemption here, 2-0 versus Han Green. Game 1, he had me at like 3 life for like 4 straight turns, but he was not able to sequence in a way through my like board dominance to fit like a Falcon, right? He was looking for a way to do that for multiple turns to be able to sequence in such a way that I wouldn't be able to defeat a Falcon. But it never happened, and then I was able to win the second game pretty cleanly and got into the top 8 with a 6-1 finish. And then in the top 8, 3 of my teammates made top 8. Well, 2 others, me and 2 other of my teammates. John, who I mentioned, went 7-0 in the Swiss, and then Mike Gem or Bobby Sapphire from the KTOD content creation, probably know him by that name. They were both on Django Tarkin Town, and we were all in one side of the bracket. So I finished 5th and Mike finished 4th. So we had to play each other in the first round. The 4th time I got paired into a teammate of mine, I was able to sneak out a 2-1 win here against Django. He did not play a TDR in games 2 or game 3, which probably heavily influenced why I was able to win those matchups. Game 2, he had me at like 2 life and had a lot of live draws. He didn't get it. Game 3, I had probably one of the cleanest Kira starts I could have with a Hylobon into a Greedo, and then a ramp into a double kill Devastating Gunship, and then I followed that up with another Devastating Gunship. And I actually played all 3 of them that game. And one key thing that happened in this match, and that happens sometimes in Kira against Django, is the games you can win are usually games where you are able to control board and push damage at the same time. Devastating Gunship goes a long way to do that. I was able to get a 7 damage swing after I barraged a Devastating Gunship. And when you do that, you end up shortening the game a little bit, because what happens when you don't push damage, it doesn't matter how much board control you get, they're always chipping damage at you, and they will draw into ways to finish you off. It's why this matchup is an absolute nightmare sometimes, is because they top deck so well against you. Anytime they find more TDRs and Ruthless Raiders, or even a late game Lurking Tie, they have damage from their row sometimes. They have Daring Raids, right? They're able to poke, and some of their units are very sticky. They play shielded units, so it's sometimes hard to remove straight up. So that's a little more chip damage. And when you're able to push damage yourself in this matchup, you can sometimes shorten the game a little bit so you can control board while hitting them. And that is what happened. And again, no TDRs was huge for me. And I was able to sneak by into the top 4, where bam, I got paired again into John, who smoked me again 2-0. And that was where my run ended. And that was the 5th of the 9th round that I got paired into a teammate. But of course, when 3 of us make the top 8, that was going to be likely up there no matter what. So that was my run with Kira ECL. I'm very happy about it. I would consider running this deck back, maybe with some changes, maybe not. But let's look at the deck now. So this is the Kira ECL that I ran. I opted for 10 turn 1 plays. I've been on 11 for a very long time. I did cut an Inferno 4. It's the only one that I can justify cutting. It does, once again, probably at its best into Django, but that matchup was not one I was targeting. I knew that matchup wasn't going to be great, and a third Inferno 4 was not going to fix that matchup. I don't think you can touch the other ones. Hylobons were all stars. I think that card gets underplayed sometimes. That bounty is really not that big of a deal a lot of the time. I like pulling this guy out. When I have one resource left over, I'll just play it. Being able to have units on board means more action economy, which is actually very important for a Kira deck. It also represents a potential 3/2 shielded unit at any time, which is a real threat, right? The math really adds up, especially when you're in a world with 5 health units. It makes things like Death Trooper better because it can make a 5 damage attack. It makes things like Super Laser Tech trade better, and again, because they add up to 5, it makes your devastating gunships better because you can hit for 3 and then gunship. This exact sequence, not with Hylobon, but a similar sequence where I was able to hit for 3 with a Death Trooper, and then gunship saved me from a DJ steal during the mono Han matchup that I played. But yes, I like Hylobons late in the game. It's the only way you can pull 2 units out of Vader, which is something I really like to do. Like, I'll basically always pull it out unless I'm like the only thing that can go wrong is my opponent drawing more cards. But yes, so I opted with 10 turn 1 plays, and I thought that was reasonable. There are a lot of matchups where you are okay not playing a turn 1 play if you have ramp on turn 2. So it's what we went with. I also stuck 1 Super Laser Blast in this main deck, and I did have a second in the sideboard, and this is for a very specific reason, something I'll talk a little bit more about in the full meta review. But there are 2 decks that are gaining popularity, one especially, but another also, and they are Bossk Green with the 30 health ramp Bossk Green and Han Green, both ramp decks, right? And Super Laser Blast is solid into those matchups, right? Like, Bossk Green is trying to go big into giant monsters. It often plays Vaders, which is a go wide card, and Super Laser Blast does give you a hard reset into these decks where it makes your Avengers so much better afterwards. And same with Han Green, it's playing big things. It plays U-Wing, which is a go wide card. I felt like 1 Super Laser Blast main just made me feel a little safer into a couple of these matchups. Now, I only ever cast this one time in the entire tournament. It was actually against mono yellow Han, where it did save me. I killed 2 of my opponent's units, and I think I killed 4 of my own with this Super Laser Blast, but if I hadn't played it, I would have died. And playing it, and I actually ended up winning that game after that Super Laser Blast. So it's a reasonable card in some matchups. I would play it. Like, I don't feel like I need it, but it's nice to have against any blue hero mid-range decks. So think things like Anakin. I would play it in mirrors. So there is some use for it. It's a card I've often not included, not even in a sideboard. But of course, the backup plan against Palpatine is also nice. Knowing that knowing you can beat a Palpatine game 1 because you have Super Laser Blast in your main is a good feeling. Most of the rest of this deck is very similar to how I presented it in the Kira guide. So if you're interested in some more like a deeper dive into this deck list, I'd go start there. But yeah, so that's all I got for this event. It was a great time. Played some really good players. It was tough to grind, fun to grind. Congratulations to all my teammates that went on to crush. John made it all the way to the finals and actually got his PQ invite. His Worlds invite. And it was just a really good time. But let's go hop over to SW Competitive Hub now and take a look at the meta as a whole. All right, so now I'm going to take a look at the meta as a whole. I want to get an idea of what's been winning, what new decks maybe have been propping up, and maybe we can figure out what's well positioned and if there's any new tech that we need to be including in some lists. So if we go here to SW Competitive Hub, check out the meta section. So right off the bat, we can get a look at what's been winning. Now, this doesn't include all the results to date, but it does have a good amount of them from the PQs. We see Mono Yellow Han is the deck that has won the most PQs at 15. It's a lot. Sabini CL in second place with 7. And then, 4 for Bossk Green, 3 Quinlan Tarkentown, 3 Anakin Blue. So it really does drop down. But I think more interesting, actually, than just what's gotten first place is top 8s. This is, you get much more, like a much clearer idea of what's winning in like large numbers, because winning the whole event, sometimes it's a little fluky too. It's very little data, but we get much more with this top 8. And here we see actually, so Mono Yellow Han is still number 1, 73, and Sabini CL at 2 with 62. It's about 18 and 15%. So those two really have held strong as like 1, 2 in terms of top 8 representation. Then you have like a drop down that I say will include about 4 decks. Looks like Quinlan Tarkentown at the head there, Django Tarkentown, Cad Bane Tarkentown, right? This is the Tarkentown trio. And then we have Bossk Blue, which, although it has a lot of top 8 results, I think right now is actually not a very well-positioned deck because it gets absolutely creamed by Mono Yellow Han. I think I will predict, I'm not going to check this right now, but I predict a lot of these results probably came a little earlier in the meta, and I expect that there has been a drop-off in how well it's performing with just how much Mono Yellow Han is around. Bossk Green, on the other hand, now is at 15 top 8s, and this is definitely a deck we're going to look at a little more closely because it's kind of a newcomer in terms of like how many people are picking this up. It's quite a strong deck, and it is nice to see that something has kind of pushed into the meta that maybe didn't start at the top there. After that, we have Anakin Blue, we have Kira Green, Palp Yellow, and then Han Green. Now, Han Green is, look, it's still a Han deck. Still does a lot of the stuff Mono Yellow Han does. Han Green is a much more explosive deck potentially. Like the games that they play resupply early are incredibly powerful. I know that recently BN Lego Pizza has won 2 straight PQs with a Han Green list, and we're going to take a look at that as well. It's still not a deck that's being played very much, but it is quite powerful. It has a lot of spike potential, and there's been, I believe, a few PQ wins now with this deck, not just by BN Lego Pizza. So further down, we can see Ray Red. It's kind of a similar style to Anakin Blue, Krennic Green, similar to Kira Green, and past that, we really don't need to focus too much else. So this is kind of the meta. So newcomers a little bit, Bossk Green and Han Green, 2 new ramp decks actually. And what we have noticed is that ramp decks do fight pretty well into Han Yellow. Kira ECL, a decent deck into Han Yellow. Bossk Green is very good into Han Yellow. It's a 9 ramp deck, the 30 health Bossk Green that is. And then now we see Han Green, which also has a favorable matchup into Han Yellow. So that's something important to know, that ramp strategies can get over this Han stuff. It makes their DJ plan less consistent, lets you get to your leader quicker. All very good stuff. So I want to take a look first at some Bossk Green stuff, and then we'll look at some Han Green. So if I click the Bossk Green button, so here we go. So in London, this was a week ago, this list won a PQ. And this is a huge ramp deck, right? This is 9 ramp, 3 bounty, 3 resupply, 3 super laser tech with a ton of top end, right? You got Vaders and Mauls, you got triple Walker, you got some Palps. I see even one crate in this main deck. And, the bounty package is actually not like super heavy. It's Bounty Hunter's Quarry and a couple Death Marks and the ramp bounty. And the 3 drops, none of this is aggressive. It's a ton of Sentinels on the ground. It's all 6 of the 3/3 Sentinels that this deck can play, the Phase Dark Trooper and the Cell Block Guard. Only one turn 1 unit is Kylo's Tie, which is actually not a very good card in this deck. It's just kind of like a little bit of a necessity and concession. And then you got some Punishing Ones as another space unit. And Timely Intervention is kind of your removal in a lot of cases where you can use it with some of these early space units to bash in space. And then its secondary and like very important plan is with Reinforcement Walker, because that's really how you can stabilize. You can get a 6 heal with that play. And then a little bit of removal, right? Daring Raids and Force Chokes. Daring Raids work well with a bounty plan because in conjunction with Bossk 1 damage, you can deal 3 with Daring Raid. And if you start with Bounty Hunter's Quarry, that's incredibly powerful, especially into something like Sabine, because you can kill their turn 1 unit and get a 3-drop on the same turn. So this deck, right? Major ramp deck. That's the plan. I believe this deck has a pretty poor matchup into Django. In my personal testing, I've run a decks like this. I've played with this and then made some changes, and I don't think it has a particularly powerful Django matchup. It does have an incredibly difficult time dealing with lurking TIE Phantoms. Outside of a timely intervention ambush with Punishing One, you will see that you very rarely can remove those units, and they can really pour in a lot of damage before you get your finishers out. It's not impossible, but it's not a very strong matchup there, but it does do very well into Mono Yellow Han. With the right bounty sequence and the right removal draws, especially with Barrage, this can fight into Sabine as well. So not hopeless in that regard. And then into most mid-range unit decks, it is a bit advantaged just because they kind of have to play to the board, which turns on all your bounties, makes it easier to ramp, makes it easier to just get to your top end. So it's a cool list. Bossk Green is a pretty popular deck right now, and it's something that I would add into a testing rotation. I'm going to look at one other version of this. This is one that won in Germany on the same weekend. Let me open up this image. It's also going to be a giant ramp deck, right? But this one played definitely a little more to the ground, right? We see Salacious Crumbs, Yularans, 1 Piet. The 1 Piet and the 1 Client here, I believe, are mostly just to fetch out of the Quarry or the Darth Vader. But a little bit of just extra low to the ground units to play, especially on turn 1. And then this deck is also playing Open Fire. But other than that, it's a very similar style, very similar build, and another PQ down with this deck. And now I want to take a look at some Han Green. So here we go. Now we'll look at the one that just won in New York at the PQ that I was at. And this is a very similar list that this guy ran a week ago. I believe in the main deck, the only change was he's now playing Echo-based Defender instead of Sundari Peacekeeper as a 3-drop. I believe they're both mainly there to help against Sabine, but Echo-based Defender kind of does it proactively while Sundari has to get an attack off. So that's probably why the change was made. Other than that, you got a little casino style in this deck. There's a lot of off-aspect cards. In the main deck, you see Luke and Cad Bane. In the sideboard, there's an overwhelming Barrage and an extra Luke. And the plan here is to press just mulligan aggressively for resupply. You mulligan every hand that doesn't have resupply, and then you hope you get resupply in your second one. If you don't, this deck is also playing 3 R2s. So if you have that in your second hand, you may use R2 to try to dig even further for resupply. And if that doesn't happen, hopefully you draw it before turn 3, because ideally you are playing a 7-drop on turn 4. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. And it's very consistent at doing that. The games where you don't do that are definitely going to be a bit of a grind. There is also an absolute turbo ramp combo here where on turn 1, if you have a Marauder in your hand, you resource the Marauder, you play your resupply and then at the end of the turn, when you're defeating the resource, you defeat the Marauder. On that next turn, if you have another Marauder, you can then use Han's ability and play Marauder, fetching the Marauder you destroyed. You have now double ramped. You can immediately flip your Han that turn. On turn 2, attack and then even play a 2-cost card if you have one, something like Spark of Hope. Not Spark of Hope. Unfortunately, nothing would have died. Something like Spark of Rebellion, post board would make sense. R2, Cloud Rider, right? But that doesn't happen very often, but you win most of the games where that happens. But this is still a Han deck. It's just not really an aggro deck anymore, although when you're playing a 7-on-4, you do turn the corner fairly quickly. But this generates just such crazy value with its big units, with the U-Wings, the 7-drops, the home 1. there are situations where these games go long and you do just play DJ from your row for 9, or you like play these 7 drops off aspect for 9, like Luke and Cad Bane. This does also include the tech DJ combo, which you can do. If you resupply on turn 1, you can play a tech without resourcing on turn 2, and then play a DJ on turn 3 without resourcing with Han's ability. And so, like, way less actions that your opponent have to respond to this, because you don't have to activate Han's ability if you do that resupply. This deck can beat up on yellow Han, especially when it ramps, but it has a much harder time beating Sabine. Really, you need things to line up well for you. You still mostly need to ramp. You've got some units that brawl well, especially Falcon against a space start, but most Sabines will not start A-Wing against a Han deck because of that blowout. You've got Echo-based Defender, but he's not actually incredible, right? He just blocks a 2-drop and dies. You've got modded Cohort, which, depending on what they're running, may get you a nice kill. And ideally, you need to try to block a Darksaber with Kira, maybe, on turn 3. And then after that, you really need to get to your 7s and hope to stabilize off of that. Waylays, of course, are in here as well, but I do think that is a very difficult matchup for this Han Green deck. So you see new decks coming in to target the number 1 deck, but they're not necessarily good into like the 2 and 3, right? This one is a little weaker into Sabine, where the Bossk Green much weaker into Django, but they're both doing quite well into mono yellow Han. All right, so we looked at some of that, and those are really the 2 lists I wanted to highlight. They are the 2 sort of newcomers. Most of the other decks I have highlighted in a previous tournament recap video. They aren't super change at this point, although one note I want to say about the Han Yellow is originally it was played much more without the so-called Rebel package, but there are more decks now being played with this like Rebel package, and this is not one of them, actually. The one that got second place in Seattle. So that is not the one I meant to open. I need to find one that I know, and I think this one. Yep. So here we have the Rebel package Han Yellow, and you know, the decks are very similar. The main change here is you're not playing things like the 2/2 shielded units. You are playing something like C-3PO, and then you get to play Wing Leader. Now, this one is very heavy on Rebels. I've seen some that are a little less. So this is also playing Rebels Pathfinder and then Fleet Lieutenant. So you actually have 6 cards that care about Rebels. I've also seen ones that don't have Fleet Lieutenant. It's just Wing Leader is the only one that actually cares about Rebels. And then no Rebel Pathfinder, and you see like a split between Ezra and Rogue Operative. But mostly the reason you're doing this is not the Wing Leader or the Fleet Lieutenant. It's the C-3PO, who is very, very good in this deck. He's more than 50% to hit if the deck is constructed well. And then he's also a little sticky and makes your opponent have to decide between taking a really annoying amount of time to defeat it just to prevent the card draw. And it can get kind of out of hand. But the rest, mostly the same. And you know, I think both lists are pretty powerful. Mono Yellow Han is still the top dog, and we'll see if it stays that way. My prediction is likely yes through the end of this PQ season. But that is all I'm going to cover today. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think are some of the best decks. Let me know what you think of the meta as a whole. Interested to hear your thoughts. And until next time, take care.